And Michael, this is a class that is part of the Universidad del Medio Ambiente, University of Environment, which is independent and private university that is focused on sustainability. They offer master's program, and they have a very, let's say, unique program, very experimental about sustainability. And this is a class that is called System Thinking and Sustainability in a Dynamic Planet. And I'm facilitating this class, so we have a review. What is system thinking? What is systems dynamics? We went to several exercises. Also, we were studying epistemology of science and different approaches of science, and how do we build the understanding of what we consider knowledge, and how that also informs what we think about sustainability. And we were also reviewing critical notions of sustainable development. And we were reviewing also notions of epistemic pluralism and epistemic justice. And all of that is trying to build let's say, a solid knowledge to start thinking critically about what is sustainability. Some, as you will see when they introduce themselves, some of these participants of this class are focused a lot on sustainability projects. They're consultants or PhD students, professors on complexity, so you will hear from them. And really, thank you so much for being here. It's totally an honor and a pleasure, and we all were very excited about listening to you today. I have told them a lot about the Sustainability Lab. So welcome everyone, and please introduce yourself. Who wants to go first?
I can go if you want.
Go ahead, Clau.
Okay. Well, my name is Claudia Romero. I am a lawyer from the base. I've been working for the past 10 years in the human rights field, and especially in the governmental structures that enhance participation processes in the accomplishment of the human rights, particularly the human right to water. I mean, the advocacy process, the policy monitoring, and the policy evaluation process with hand to hand with civil society.
All right.
I do that kind of work normally, but right now I started the PhD because it fascinates me so much the way this human right, the complexity of its accomplishment, and I decided to go studying a PhD on interdisciplinary studies. With my research subject is power relationships in the administration of water, and I'm trying to see it from a systemic perspective. I'm having a very hard time because as a lawyer, I have a frame that is really tight. So this is very new for me, but the perspective of my PhD, which is interdisciplinary, is helping. So I'm starting a case study here in Querétaro, a city in Mexico, of how water is managed, and also how the word and the institutional pretension of sustainability, it's more like a fiction, because it's not really going anywhere as long as we keep with the inertial implementation kind of policy, way of thinking from both sides, both civilians and governmental thinking. So I'm in the middle of all that, trying to figure it out and understand, and being helpful to change the way things are done.
Oh, that's great. You'll be a good case study of how to turn lawyers into system thinkers.
Yeah, I hope.
Okay, who goes next?
I guess I can go.
All right.
My name is Pablo Laris. I am from Mexico, and I did my studies in Boulder, Colorado. my major was in environmental science. I then came back to Mexico to start working in a consulting company called Social Value. I believe you know Social Value and you know Monica.
Yeah.
Monica Munoz. I actually work very close with her, and she's my boss, I want to say. I'm very interested in learning not only systems thinking, but also how I can apply it to corporate sustainability. I am in a project now with a big company in Mexico called Alsea, and I want to really have these tools to apply it to this project. I heard it back then in Boulder, the notions of systems thinking and system dynamics, but it's the first time that I really have like that sense of applying it and applying it to a project. So it's been real. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having these 3 hours with us, and I'm really excited to listen what you have to give us. And thank you so much. And any questions or whatever, I'll be here. And sorry, but my internet is pretty bad here. That's why I'm in kind of like in my garden. But well, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. So let's try to make a bit faster the presentation so all of you could have the chance of presenting or introducing yourself, and also start listening to Michael's story too. So who goes next?
I can go next. Okay, so my name is Claudia too, but I'm Claudia Uranga. I am an artist, and well, I'm here in this class because I want one of my thesis was in my last studies was about the epistemic construction of the self and our subjectivities, and I got involved in a class about Anthropocene, so I got close into ecofeminism, and then I discovered like that the word sustainability was like how you are saying in one of the videos that I saw about you, that it's a really misunderstood word or used for whatever, and that's something that I feel so connected to, not just in sustainability but in another subjects that I found in my everyday life as an artist. So that's why I came into this class, and I'm really excited to hear everything you want to tell us, and yeah, I'm really excited.
I will not comment every time, so don't worry. Just continue.
Yeah, so maybe that's my short introduction. I can keep talking, but that's like my resume.
Great. What art do you do?
I am a conceptual artist. I started as a painter, but like everything is dynamic. I just start to transform myself and learn about new artists. I began at a really early age. I'm just 23 years old, and I already graduated from I don't know, it's called it's like a degree, yeah, as an artist. And I started 6 years ago painting, and now I am experimenting with everyday life objects. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, so nice to meet you.
So you're expected to say who you are, what did you study, what are you working on, and why you are here, and very briefly, so we can also get on going. And please jump in to introduce.
Okay, I can go next then. My name is Jesus. You can call me. Everybody does. I studied education. I've been working in education, innovation, and creativity for 17 years almost. I have 3 projects. One is for human innovation, whether it's in schools and corporate learning. The other one is social and environmental entrepreneurship for kids. This is more like millennium skills development. And then I have an organization which is called Sistémico, which is a social and environmental regeneration processes, starting from the regeneration of green areas to make them spaces for social participation and stuff. I studied education, I said that, and I'm learning more. I studied the master's at the University of the Environment here in Mexico, and I'm learning more about systems thinking. I think it's I'm passionate about. I really consider it like a whole mindset that can let us understand what's happening fully. And I'm also part of the Vibrancy Network with Vanessa and many of the people that are here. Hi, Caro. And hi, Lourdes. And hi, Ana Luisa. And well, it's just awesome. Thank you.
Great.
I can go next. Hi, I'm Georgina. I'm also from Mexico City, and I'm studying, well, I studied Sustainable Development Engineering. I'm studying the Green MBA here there in University of Environment. And right now I'm working with a store that it's like collective work with producers from the rural area of Mexico City. So right now we are 18 and we have 9 months in this project, and we are trying to doing it systemic, systemic way, like not only it's not only selling products, but also all the environmental and social implications that it comes from food and the stuff for people in the Mexico City.
Great.
Nice to meet you.
I'll go. My name is Lourdes. I'm a linguist and neuropsychopedagogue by training. Later in life, I got derailed from that, and then I am now a recovering businesswoman. Interested in economics and working with that model and that proficiency. I'm now studying the master's with them. Got me involved in this system dynamics and sustainability. I was understanding it from a different perspective from the business side, but I'm very interested in getting to understand the bigger
picture, the bigger picture.
Sustainability.
Good.
My name is Carolyn, and I'm from the greater Boston area. I studied global studies at university, which kind of led me into, through a stroke of luck, I met Vanessa, and she convinced me to take a system dynamics master's in Norway. And so now I'm working with Vanessa and with Vibrancy and with Chewy as well for a few projects as a socioeconomic systems analyst. And I'm also at the same time a dancer and choreographer, and trying to find a way that I can marry those two together, and have not figured it out yet. But
all right. You know, actually, there is, I don't know if I remember the name, there is in New York a very interesting ballet group. I'll send Vanessa the name when I can.
I don't know if you're in mute. No, you're not in mute, but we... Can you hear him? Do you hear Michael?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
It was our connection then. Perfect.
It's okay? All right, so I was saying there is a ballet group here in New York. I'll have to find the name and send it to Vanessa with a brilliant choreographer who is the head of this very small, very esoteric group. And they did a wonderful piece, 3 scientific theories. Theory of, I can't remember, what was it? It was the theory of relativity, something from quantum mechanics, and the theory of strings or something in 3 ballet episodes. And it was absolutely unbelievable. I'll send you the name of this so you can look at it. It was really fantastic.
Please do.
You can use human body and a group of human bodies to express a lot of those very abstract ideas. So you're in the right place, even if you don't know yet how to do it. All right, let's go on.
I'm Alexa. I'm German by origin, but I've been living in Mexico for almost 20 years. I work at the UMA, the Environmental University, coordinating the Sustainable Tourism Master. And in my field, but also in general, I try to get a deeper understanding of what sustainability should really be today, especially in tourism. And here in Mexico, everything is still working on a very technical level, and very few people realize that we need a deeper second level change. And yeah, that's why I'm always happy to explore new suggestions and understand a little bit more of these very complex things. And I'm really honored to be in this session with you.
Great. What brought you to Mexico?
Mostly my fascination for ancient and indigenous cultures, and the knowledge that they preserve and that has been lost in many more industrialized countries.
Great.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm also here from Mexico City. And I've always been like divided into two main interests, which are basically art collective I have like for the past 11 years, and we're into engaging activities and social participation and that sort of stuff. And also I have a consultancy firm. And usually I used to describe myself as a urban social scientist, but now it's more rural than urban because of the projects I've been into, because of both interests, which are like recently connecting a lot, getting to know exceptional communities doing specific work among themselves as a community for the environment, and these I call them communities of exception, and I'm interested on that topic specifically. I've been traveling south of Mexico and working for a project for the National Commission of Biodiversity here, like working out a new term of biodiversity friendly, which is like they want to like introduce it here in Mexico and have it people understand. And we were mapping several producers and consumers and the different marketplaces where it is to be consumed and how should be like deployed in these different levels. So that got us to amazing examples of people doing like beautiful things, and just my heart went like grew bigger because of pride and seeing all these people doing great stuff. And recently I thought everything was like very much systemic in my life. I had like a lot of going on there, and recently I met Vanessa, and suddenly things like got to a new dimension of things with vibrancy, and then this is the study of systemic thinking, and now speaking to you and your amazing work, it also opens a new door to understand the world and how we really relate to them, and your perspective on it, it's like been enlightening. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Who goes next quickly? There are people who will like to introduce yourself, or if there are people who don't want to introduce yourself, we can just keep on going. But I think if you could be quicker and just to mention your name and what do you do.
I can go now. Well, my name is Lorenzo. I've been studying the relationships of psychology, ecology, and economy. And I always loved having interdisciplinary collaborations. And now with all this system thinking, it has been really an amazing finding. So it's really nice to be listening to you, Ben, Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kari. My English is not good, but I'm going to try. I'm from Tabasco. It is at the south of Mexico, and I am a consultant, environmental consultant, and I am a mother of 3 kids, and I like all the themes related to dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. Anyone else who would like to introduce?
Should I go next, Vanessa? Can you hear me? Hi, Michael. I am Hector. I'm from Monterrey, from the north of Mexico. Well, not right now. I'm living in the capital. And for living, I do consultancy in risk management. And I'm very interested in how, I have been working with this company that creates community interventions. And it's in order to create, the thing is, he creates community interventions, but it's trying to go into sustainable sphere. So we're trying to work in some strategies to make that happen. And I think that dynamic system can be an important tool in order to achieve that, especially to understand complexity and move all this information into decision making, which is really important for the company.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Sam, Yehia, who else is missing? Sam already. Juan? Okay, so Sam is there, and she says that she doesn't feel very comfortable speaking in English, but she will try. And she wrote a note that she's Samantha Fuerte, which means strong, her last name. And she's an environmental engineer, and she's a consultant on process issues and advisor in hospitals in topics related to environmental issues. And it's a really honor to meet you, Michael. And she's very interested in getting more knowledge on the topics we have covered in the during the class. And she is interested in working with communities in process of transformation. And she's looking for being able to answer some of questions that she had from previous works to get all the perspectives involved. So perhaps Juan, so welcome, Sam, thank you. Perhaps Yehia or Juan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, ¿me escuchan? Can you hear me? Okay, my name is Juan. I haven't looked at myself, but hi everybody. I am a researcher and I work on geometric statistics and urban morphology. And I am very interested in some issues about complexity and how occurs the evolution of systems in general in systems. And I am very interested in systematic thinking, and I am trying to match this kind of knowledge with geometric statistics. That's
okay.
All.
Yehia, would you like to introduce yourself because the rest of the people don't know you?
Yes, I'm just was muted for a while, so I wasn't sure if I should speak too much or not, but I will speak very little, which is not me. So my name is Yehia. I am Egyptian. and I'm living in Norway. I work in University of Bergen, and I am a bioinformatic engineer. I work mainly with data visualization and large data analysis. So I'm very interested in system thinking. I'm coming from Egypt, which is very chaotic. And we try to find a way. I've been participating in many different organizations, different fields, trying to find the solution for Egypt, which I think it's a bit complicated and need a lot of system thinking. But I'm here today to get to know more and hope that I can find a way that I can participate in some point and help even with make the complex system less complex and increase the knowledge. Like this is what we do in general in field of proteomics, what we call as all protein analysis. So maybe we can apply the same techniques actually in a large data to get more information, expand information. So I'm here to learn. I will be silent more time. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here, so I will try to keep myself quiet. But it's an honor for me to meet you and to meet all of the amazing people around Vanessa. And we have a short talk before anyway, so that was good for introductory, but for other people just to get to know me. And I think that's it about me for now. So I will back to muted level again, but I will be just listening because it's quite late here. So I am really looking forward to listen to you and to get to know more about the field and about how can I adjust this according to your conversation to the current situation. How can we help? Nice to see you. Yeah.
All right, we're back to Vanessa.
Yeah, so I think it's almost everyone has introduced. I think Rodrigo is in class, and I guess Cecia is at her work, so she's listening. Unless you guys are there, I think we can proceed. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for sharing to Michael who you are. So here you can read that Rodrigo is, I think, in class, but she has said that she sometimes listens to this class while he is in another class at his university. So it's like kind of funny. But his name is Melchor, and he's a lawyer. And also he studies management too. So he has learned something, he has taken some courses about permaculture. And his personal goal is learn and apply system thinking to different aspects related to human rights and principles of proper development. And he hopes to learn a lot from you, Michael, and from the rest of the class. And he thinks that consciousness and emotional intelligence is crucial for now. So thank you, Rodrigo. And thanks all of you to share a bit who you are with Michael. And Michael, welcome. And now we are here to listen about your life story and how you came up with this vision of sustainability, why you care about that, what does it has to do with the second order change that you're proposing to the world. So like this ground and floor is for you. We'll listen to you.
Well, it's wonderful to meet you all. It sounds like I can learn much more just by listening to you and all your different backgrounds and interests and experience. It's a very strange experience to talk into the internet kind of thing. I find it usually extremely instructive to be with a group because you can really get a lot of information from people's eyes, and that's a great guide to where to go and what to emphasize and so forth. So this is a new experience, talking to a whole network of people in different places, in different locations, and we'll see how this technology does. Meanwhile, Vanessa is having dinner, and it makes me hungry here more and more, but wait. Anyway, so I think I'll tell you a little bit about my own background and perhaps trajectory. into that world. Not because it's important to talk about myself, but because I think it's an interesting story in retrospect, and it's interesting to see where it led. As you know, well, you know my name, Michael, and I was born and grew up in Israel. I left the country when I was 21, pretty much a day after I finished the military service, and went to England. I wanted to study architecture and went to England to a school that was called the Architectural Association in London. I was interested in building since a very early age and thought that that would be my vocation. But as it turned out, during the very first semester of the, is this noise controllable, Vanessa? During the very first semester of the first year, I happened to go to a lecture in London that was given by Buckminster Fuller. Are you familiar with him and his work? None? Nobody? Anybody? Nobody in the group heard the name?
I know something about Buckminster Fuller. He's an architect. He was an architect. He's very interesting man, and his work is amazing.
Okay, so Fuller was the inventor of the geodesic domes. I'm sure most of you know what geodesic domes are. Perhaps the most dramatic one is the structure in Montreal for the World Fair in the 70s. It's a very large dome that is quite known around the world. Fuller was the person who invented that structural system that was based on a whole geometry that he developed at the time that was called synergetic geometry. Now, Fuller was not an architect himself, but he did a number in the 30s of the last century. He did a number of extremely interesting designs for kind of industrially produced dwellings. And those things had a huge influence on the world of architecture in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So he was kind of adopted, if you like, by the architectural profession. But Fuller belonged to the group of people who very early on began to speak about the impact of humans on the planet and about the whole issue of the interaction of people and the world. He was very much involved with issues concerning the management of world resources, population, and so on. All the issues, in fact, that today come under the so-called sustainability umbrella. The term did not exist in those days yet. But his influence was very great. To give you a sense about him, he was a real Renaissance person that had an impact on many spheres, way beyond architecture. When he passed away at the age of 86 or so, he had some 54 different doctorates in subjects from physics and engineering to architecture and urban planning and theater and poetry, you name it, which gives you a good sense of the impact that he had on many fields. Anyway, Fuller was in London. I didn't know anything about him. I was 21 then. As I said, just fresh from Israel. And he was giving a lecture to the Association of British Architectural Students. And the topic that he was discussing was the project that he was trying to promote in those days that he called the World Design Science Decade. World Design Science Decade, 10 years of design. And what the idea was that he was trying to promote, that all the architectural students from around the world, all the architectural schools around the world will collaborate on a 10-year program to do what? To redesign the world. And that was a typical Fuller, thinking way, way beyond what was even possible. academically and so on. But absolutely right. And the kind of networks that are emerging today everywhere, many of the things that Vanessa is involved with, certainly the fellows program that we are trying to develop in the lab, are basically a manifestation of those ideas that he was talking about already in the 70s, but how a large number of people from everywhere will have to come together and start collaborating in deliberately designing the future. Anyway, I never heard anything like this. Of course, to me, architecture was Frank Lloyd Wright or Corbusier. You design a building or you design a table or a chair. And here was someone talking about the whole planet as an object of design. And that was like somebody really hit me on the head with a big piece of wood. And I got very excited as a young person and was kind of all agitating. How do you join that program? And next to me happened to be sitting, as though things happen usually, happened to be sitting a young man who was teaching at the AA. He was not my direct teacher, but I knew him. It was Keith Critchlow. He was an artist, painter, turned mathematician. And I turned to him and asked, how can we at the AA, at that school, collaborate in the program? And his response was that he was already doing some research in mathematics with Fuller, and that he was going to meet him for breakfast the next morning, and he was asking whether I would care to join, which of course I did, and that's how I met Fuller, and we kind of hit it off on a personal level, and I decided to begin to work on that program. And it very quickly turned out that much of it was in his own head. Really, it wasn't there were not many schools around the world that was collaborating and all of those kind of things. From the AA, we started to work on that program. And the school was very kind of progressive, very avant-garde school. And they allowed me off of schoolwork in lieu of work that I was doing with him. So it was a wonderful 5 years of spending time with him in Africa, in other places. And the deal was that every year I still needed to pass the requirements of the school, but usually I would come to London in the summers and do it and continue with him somewhere else. So the second year we were in Africa, the third year somewhere else. And at the end of that period, he invited me to join his staff in the United States. At the time he was based at the University of Carbondale in Illinois. And he ran a group there that was called the World Resources Inventory and the World Game. And I joined that group. And at the time, I was beginning to see the issues that he was talking about managing the world resources and the planet and so forth, as issues issues related to the notion of managing complexity. And I became aware of the then beginning to emerge concepts in general system theory, and particularly cybernetics, and thought that in those areas, a new epistemology was being developed that made it possible to deal with issues of complexity. And I got very interested in those and started studying general system theory. And while working with Fuller in the United States, I began to commute to London to get a doctorate in cybernetics. I felt that cybernetics would have a huge impact on all the things. So I think I gravitated to those fields very much as you do today, beginning to understand that system thinking and the whole system approach is an absolutely essential component in dealing with the world, because the world is a complex situation, not complex in the sense of being too complex to understand or something like this, but complex in the sense that it's a very large reality that is comprised of many interacting variables of all sorts, and altogether they comprise that totality that we are trying to understand. And as it appears more and more, all the traditional, conventional scientific analytical methods that are essentially linear and don't recognize and cannot deal with complex situation require a completely different approach. And that's why the system thinking thing that you are involved with now is so important. I would even go a little further and say that many of the issues that we see around the world today, in all kinds of problems, but certainly the sustainability-related issues, issues that are brought about largely by humanity not taking a system view of things, but trying to fragment everything into small pieces and deal with them in isolation. So system thinking has become an important tool. I myself began to pursue it because I felt that it's an essential tool if you want to deal with the kind of issues that all of you seem to be understanding, seem to be interested in. But remember that all of this is now going back to the early 70s, where that realization was much less common. And it's really great to see that more and more people are gravitating to this kind of thinking, and there's more and more opportunities to experiment and learn and incorporate things. It's great to see that even lawyers are now interested in system thinking and so on. Hi, Monica. So I left Fuller's group. We were doing a lot of very interesting work, and I left the group in the 80s, and in the early 70s, and started actually, the issues of sustainability were not yet at the fore. It was not possible or not easy to get work working on those issues. So I basically set myself up at the time as a management consultant, only because you needed a professionally, how should I say, a more or less acceptable term. In England, there was a group of cyberneticians headed by Stafford Beer, who were importing concepts from cybernetic to organizations and management, essentially looking at organizations as organisms. And going beyond the typical conventional, how do you call it, diagram? You know, here's the president and the 3 departments and something underneath and so forth. And beginning to understand companies and governments and any social groups essentially as complex organisms, and beginning to look at their internal structures and how they in fact are able to adapt and evolve and so forth. It was a very interesting topic. My own PhD, incidentally, was trying to interpret the theory of evolution from the viewpoint of cybernetics. In other words, looking at evolution as a type of stability, if you like. And we can talk about this a little later. But by the 80s, the world was catching up, and I find myself being brought on projects that require more and more the systemic integration of all the ideas that Fuller was talking about, meaning issues of the environment with issues of economics and issues of social organizations and so forth. And these were mostly large projects involving regional planning. For example, a project with the International Joint Commission that dealt with the whole region of the 5 Great Lakes that are joined by Canada and the United States. There are all kinds of very interesting issues there that had to do with water level fluctuations. To give you a sense of that, in the 80s, there were 2 years of very high precipitation levels that resulted in increasing increasing water levels. The water level in the lakes were rising, and that was happening at the time where also there were a number of major storm events in 85 and 86 that created a huge damage along the lakes. And the governments turned to the commission for advice what to do with the lakes. And I think, I don't know if you know, but in the United States, everything that has to do with waterways is controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers. And they took an engineering approach to basically that the lake are misbehaving. And the question was how to contain them, how to build walls and canals and so forth to control the lakes. Whereas if you really think about it from a system viewpoint, the lakes are dynamic organisms again. They tend to fluctuate and fluctuated over geological times. Not only that, their fluctuation is extremely important because that's what floods regions where fish are spawned and the water are cleaned up in all the areas that we tend to see as dirty pieces of no-use land that we cover with concrete and build shop malls and so forth. So that was an opportunity that required a complex system dynamic modeling to understand all the relationships between the forces there. And so it went on. By the end of the 80s, I find myself, the world was catching up, and I find myself at the heart of the multilaterals, the large development agencies, the World Bank, some of the UN agencies, all the ones that began to try to internalize the concept of sustainable development that emerged after the UN meeting on environment and development in Rio in '82, I think it was, and so on. So that was a very interesting time. I was working with a global environment facilities and other on projects all around the world. As I said, that and my role as an outsider, as a consultant, was to try and help with bring about the systemic integration and get deeper into the issues of sustainable development. And that, incidentally, in an environment that basically took a very superficial view of what sustainable development means, and certainly was not friendly to systemic integration. I mean, the whole structure within these organizations is very fragmented and is based on professional specialties, if you like. So you have departments developed by experts on water, different than experts on energy, and experts on agriculture, and experts on fish, and experts on frogs. And it's very difficult to integrate all this in a systemic fashion. But for a while, I was thinking, I was very happy feeling that I was at the cutting edge of what was happening internationally with respect to sustainable development, sustainability, and all the issues that I was personally very interested in, although still groping to try to understand what they meant and how to approach them and so on. But it soon, I soon began to feel a little concerned that because of the huge gap between the rhetoric of sustainable development, what I was witnessing is actually happening on the ground. There was a huge distance between the word that everybody was using and the kind of project that I was witnessing. And that brought about, if you like, a little crisis, and I decided to stop working. I didn't think that that was doing anything. I started thinking about what to do next. And that's where the idea of the lab emerged, based on the notion that the kind of challenges that are brought about by the necessity of the kind of transition that has to occur are entirely unprecedented. There's no experts. No one really knows how to manage the planet with 9.5 billion people in reasonable abundance and in peace, especially. So if you don't have the precedents, if you don't have a cookbook or a recipe book to tell you what to do, you need to experiment. And all these organizations, including many in the private sector that were moving into that space, talking about corporate sustainability that I'll comment about a little later, were really not designed for the kind of radical innovation that was required. If you want to develop a career in many of those organizations, you cannot make too many mistakes, and therefore you don't feel free to experiment. And I was very naively perhaps thinking that where do you experiment? You experiment in the lab, and what the planet needs now is a global laboratory for sustainability innovations. So nobody was doing it, and said, why not start one? Very Don Quixotic kind of notion, but that brought about the notion of the lab. Now, you can interrupt me anytime if you have any questions or anything. I don't want just to talk into the screen. and have silence on the other side. So this was just a very brief introduction. And I think that what I'll do next, I'll tell you a little bit the story of the lab itself, and then we'll take it from there. But I don't know if there's any comments or any questions heretofore.
Yeah, I have one question, Michael.
Yeah.
How will you define sustainability?
How will you define sustainability?
You have been traveled to.
Okay, let me have another half an hour before we get there. Okay, but that will be an important question that we'll do. We will not end up tonight without giving it a good definition, which I hope you will adopt. Any other? Vanessa?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question about how do you relate the Buckminster Fuller architectures with
to what?
With systemic thinking.
Okay, very interesting question, and I hope that the other people there will be interested in the Fuller, as I mentioned earlier, set up to discover, if you like, what is nature's coordinate system. He wanted to uncover the language, if you like, the logic that is behind all the manifestation that are around us, believing, like others do, that there must be a coherent logic behind what we observe as myriad phenomena. And his tool to do that was the geometry that he developed that he called synergetic geometry. And he felt that in understanding the logic of the sequence of Archimedean solids, like the tetrahedron, octahedron, others, and so forth, you can begin to penetrate some of the fundamental laws, if you like, by which nature operates. And he saw the tetrahedron, which to those who are not familiar is a four-sided pyramid, a triangular pyramid, very interesting, simple piece of solid geometry that has very, very interesting properties. He saw that as the building block of nature and tried to explain complex events and phenomena by geometrical relationships. And it's this geometry, this study of synergetic geometry, that brought him to the invention of the structures that I mentioned earlier. So those structures are in fact a manifestation of a systemic thinking about structures that had a particular geometric flavor. It was very different than system dynamics because it focused on geometric modeling and understanding the dynamics of a dynamic system of geometry. Because many of those solids, I don't want to go too far into this because I don't know if that's the interest of most people, but many of the intertransformations of various geometry display an interesting, first of all, dynamism that you don't find in analytical geometry. And you can interpret them in many ways as things that evolve and adapt and so forth. The reason that I personally, this is where there is a connection there. And of course, you can be more simplistic about it by saying that if you look at a geodesic dome is an interesting system that that allows you to use the least amount of effort to cover the largest volume. This is a quality of a sphere, right? A sphere is a geometry where the ratio between the surface to the volume is the best that you can obtain. The largest volume with the minimum surface. The tetrahedron itself, which is the first possible solid, is the opposite, where you have the most amount of surface enclosing the minimum volume. So the sphere is a very efficient way to cover very large environments, if you like. And when you triangulate the surface of a sphere, you obtain a system of triangulation where the triangular subdivision provides the structural strength for the whole. So you have here a system, if you like, of mutually supportive components that repeat themselves to create a very tough and very stable system.
Okay, thank you.
More?
I have a question. I don't know whether it's for this moment or maybe a little bit later on, about the incredible attitude you seem to have, because you're a person who worked with one of the pioneers of sustainability, and then you've been involved in the big organizations worldwide, and then you left them, and then you lightly say, yeah, at some point the world caught up with the importance of these themes. How do you manage to talk about this so lightly, being this so important and so urgent? And I would be despaired if I were you, and I would have been working on these themes for many decades, and you still see politicians not reacting, and you still see all these global big problems.
Okay.
How do you maintain?
That's a very nice and interesting thing to explore. I think that the fact that I smile doesn't mean that I'm not close to despair. So I am fully cognizant, as already Fuller was at the time, where nobody was paying attention at all, of the how shall I say it, of the gravity, so to speak, of the situation. It's really touch and go. And all evidence suggests that the issues are multiplying and becoming more and more severe, and we are in many dimensions approaching critical moments of kind of no returns. And yet all the engines, as you say, the political system, the corporate world, the economy, everything is going exactly in the opposite direction. My own way to deal with this, and this maybe answers your question, and I can see the worry on your face, is that, you know, to worry about those things in a sense of just worrying is not the right way to go. It is not really creative, doesn't do much other than freezes you. You say, oh my God, this is too big. I'm only a small individual, what can I do? So I think that at the end, every single person who understands the importance of those issues has to, how should I say, find the inspiration, actually, to follow and look for what is it that I as an individual can do to turn things around. I think that there's no question that the collective task that humanity faces in turning things around is just huge. I mean, it's unbelievably huge. That's what I meant before by saying it's unprecedented. And yet it looks like we have all the creative capacity, so to speak, and the intelligence and consciousness and love and whatever, all the tools that are necessary in order to turn the ship around. So I think that sitting and worrying, I guess it's also a personal disposition. I guess I tend to be a little bit of an optimist, not naively optimist. Again, I understand the worst issues, but I also think that it will be unuseful to go and fight them. Fuller had a very nice quote once when he said, if you want to change things, don't bother fighting the existing, but create a new model that is better and will make the old one obsolete. And I think that that's what I've been trying to do in the very limited capacity that I have. But there are moments that I don't despair easily, I would say, but there are moments that I really worry about where we are and at the pace that change is happening. Although there are more things to say about this, and that is that change sometimes can be very deceptive in the way that its dynamics proceed, because it can start very slowly and then reach a geometric kind of level of acceleration. And you can go very, very slow without seeing anything happening, and then suddenly everything is happening. And there are many, many indications, I think, that at least give me some hope, and that is that there's no question that the level of interest and understanding and worrying, especially among younger people, is way ahead of where it was even 10 years ago. I mean, just the fact that that course that combines system thinking with sustainability and all the wonderful thing that you're involved with now, that, remember, didn't exist 10 years ago. And the fact that you are there, and the fact that we could see in the fellows program that we have in the lab, there's obviously an intuitive grasp by the younger world that something happening, something important is happening that needs to be dealt with in a completely different way. And this is exactly what you're doing in looking for new tools and new ways to think about things and so on.
I think this Alexa question is a very nice way of going into what the lab is doing.
Okay.
We're running.
Right. So we developed a little presentation about the lab. It was originally developed for kind of fundraising, if you like, although we haven't used it that way yet. And I'll use that to tell you the story of the lab, and that will bring us back to many of those topics. But to do that, I need to switch computers, so it will take just one moment. I hope that I still remember what to do. We tried it in the morning. So give me 1 second and we'll continue.
Any thought meanwhile Michael set up the new computer?
I'm sorry?
No, I am asking the group if they have any thoughts.
I'm just setting it up. And
about this lack of awareness in Michael's face, I can just tell you one very small story. We were some days ago for 3 weeks in Israel in this summer school where we were reviewing issues, and we were doing some experiments and looking how the sustainability framework that Michael developed is reflected in the lives of some kibbutz. So we were doing that, but it was impressive how, for instance, the classes we were taking were from, I don't know, 9 a.m. to perhaps say sometimes 9 p.m. And everyone, all the fellows were like totally tired. And Michael, after the sessions, the day sessions, he was going to meetings, you know? So he was always busy. Like everyone was energyless and Michael was going to meetings. It seems that there's a passion. And there's like this pleasure of doing what we think is good, right? And I think among some fellows, we were learning that from his example. So it's like a very joyful work and kind of energyless body, or I don't know which is Michael's fuel, but he does these things.
I have so many things on the screen here that I can't get to the presentation itself.
So remember share screen? Remember share screen on the bottom of the yeah. So just click share screen.
But now I need to find the
presentation.
The presentation, and it's covered by all the.
I see. Are you in?
Hold on. Let me try something.
Yeah.
Oh no.
In the morning we tried.
How do I minimize your screen? Oh, here. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. As you can see, I'm technology challenged. So Okay, I have the screen here now that all of your faces are on. And that prevents me from getting to the, you have any advice?
If you go to the upper left corner, you can minimize the screen where we are all on. And
I have it's on a Mac. That's the problem that I have.
In the upper left corner, there should be a red, a yellow, and a green dot. If you click on the yellow one, we should all go.
Great, got it.
Bottom border.
Okay, so now we want to open this. We're getting. Okay. And okay, so now I need to go back to this. That I minimize in order to connect to it. That shares thing. All right. Are you there?
Yeah.
Super.
Yes, it's here.
So the thing is on, right? Okay. So I'm going to tell you this now like a storytelling. So this is a story of the Sustainability Laboratory. And it's a story about the universe and about a duck. But we leave the duck for a moment and start with a bigger picture. We'll get back to this duck swimming here a little later. So since 1990s, when the Hubble telescope was launched, our whole basic understanding of the cosmos has changed very dramatically, both in terms of scale and scope and time. The kind of images that you are, I'm sure, familiar with, that Hubble was producing for us, indicated incredibly complex and dynamic environment, much larger. I mean, larger is not even the right word, much more gigantic in scope and in its dynamism and variety and complexity than ever imagined before. Remember that it's not 100 years since the prevailing view of science was that the Milky Way was the whole cosmos. In the 30s, people still thought, not people, scientists still thought that there was nothing beyond the Milky Way. And our view today is obviously completely different. But if you take a step back from this incredible scenario, you can perhaps distinguish two kinds of regions in this cosmic environment. Regions where energy is being diffused and sent around, and regions where energy is being compounded and consolidated. Now, these are the special places where complexity and order actually emerge and evolve. This gigantic dust clouds that you see here, I'm sure you're familiar with those pictures. These are thousands of light years across. So just the scale of the things are unimaginable. But these are places where stars are being born as we speak. These are things that are kind of star making factories, if you like. And when you think about this that way, in terms of energy diffusion and energy consolidation, it's obvious that our own planet, Earth, is one such special location where sun radiation, rather than being scattered and diffused, interacts with matter in order to produce order of increasing complexity. Here on Earth, what we see is the evolution of moving from complex, from simple organic molecules to all the myriad forms of life that we know about, to whole ecosystems, habitats, including human society itself, and of course, including human consciousness. And this is very interesting to think about this, because you see here a typical situation that in spite of the second law of thermodynamics, at least momentarily, allows for order creation. And what the processes that Teilhard de Chardin, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, termed complexification of matter. And so as humans, we are basically products of this cosmic order creation processes, if you like. And not only we are a product of this, but by virtue of mind, we are able to be important agents of order creation and participate in all this incredible, gigantic design. Incidentally, the picture on the right, if you can see it, that's that geodesic dome that I referred to earlier in Montreal. Any event, here you see mind being employed in configuring and reconfiguring basic building blocks of matter in preferred configurations of all kind. And so, as some people have suggested, the human mind is perhaps one of an incredibly potent order creation machine, mechanism, device, if you like. And in spite of this, and in spite of our ability to be agents of order creation, every evidence suggests that the cumulative impact of human affairs, human activity on the planet is creating, as you were suggesting yourself before, really disasters everywhere. There's no part of the biosphere that is not displaying some very traumatic, if you like, sense of stress. And here, just a small quote from Edward Wilson. I hope some of you are familiar with his work, a biologist from Harvard who studied most of his life colonies of ants, but in recent years has been doing a lot of work on the issues that we are talking about. And here's his quote in a recent book that he called Half Earth. Very interesting book, incidentally, where he suggests that half the planet will be designated wilderness and will be out of, preserved out of human encroachment. Anyway, in his book, he says, for the first time in history, a conviction has developed among those who can actually think more than a decade ahead that we are playing a global endgame. Now, this is a conservative Harvard professor, by no stretch of imagination, a left revolutionary, whatever. And you can see, and if you read his book, you get the sense of urgency that he sees, specifically because of his area of concern at his biology relating to biodiversity and the elimination of species and so on. So here we are. We find ourselves in this wonderful, beautiful, lovable, if you like, corner of universe where things actually are designed to grow and evolve, and instead we are really destroying the very fabric on which we depend. So there is an option, it's a crossroad if you like, and it's an option that concerns everyone. It's not a theoretical, conceptual, far away thing. It's really coming to the root, and it's as Aleza suggests, time is running out, and we are presented here with a choice, if you like, between continuous deterioration on the one hand or sustainability on the other. But so it's really an issue. The choice is in our hands, whether we go this way or that. And the problem is that the term sustainability itself has become so overused and so commercialized and so degraded that it almost lost its meaning. It's used now. It's become the thing to say almost in every sentence. If you don't use the term sustainability, you're not politically correct, and yet very few stop to think what it really means. And that's a very important. It's a very important issue, that lack of clarity and lack of precision. So from the viewpoint, and this will be the first time that I refer to a definition, when you think about it for a moment, the notion of sustainability has to do with a particular kind of, or rather with a particular equilibrium in the dynamic, or a dynamic equilibrium in the particular interaction between any population and the carrying capacity of its environment. Can be amoeba in a petri dish, or wildebeest, or whoever those are, wildebeest in the savannah, or lions or elephants in the habitat, or humans on the planet. And with that concept in mind, which we'll come to about later, the term that I developed as a definition that is based on that concept says that sustainability pertains to a dynamic equilibrium in the process of interaction between a population and the carrying capacity of its environment, such that the population develops to express its full potential. You don't put any limitation there, other than without producing irreversible adverse effects on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. So you see that that definition captures the essence of that interaction between a population and a carrying capacity. And it's very different than the prevailing definition that came out of the Brundtland Commission and many others. But let me leave this at face value for a moment, and we'll return to this in a little bit. So this is an idea that tries to capture the notion that the challenge of transition to sustainability is unprecedented. As I mentioned earlier, there's no cookbook or recipe book to tell us what to do, and therefore we need to experiment. And where do you experiment? You experiment in a lab. Labs have been traditionally an environment where you secured some good talent and good resources and gave young minds, young fertile minds, if you like, the freedom to search for new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things, and so forth. And time and again, in fact, when humanity was faced with some interesting technology or other issues, it resorts to labs to do so. Think about Bell Labs or some other, including the defense labs, incidentally. So what I mentioned earlier, it seems to be that in face of that reality, what the planet needs now is this concept of a global laboratory for sustainability innovations. And that's the realization that stood behind the concept of launching the Sustainability Laboratory, with an idea that it will combine sound science radical experimentation and really deep innovation. And like the defense laboratories assembled incredible talent and resources around weapons of mass destructions and more intelligent bombs and things like this, the lab will deal with issues that Fuller called livingry, how to make the world a better place. And if with the same resources and the same talent was coming around those notions, we face a good chance to make them important breakthroughs. And so you never change things, this is Fuller incidentally, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. It's a very important realization. Don't spend your energy arguing against the wrong, but try to develop a better way of doing things yourself, and really rely on humanity's innate intelligence that they will pursue at the end the right thing. So at the lab, we've been trying to put together what we usually call the signature approach. And the signature approach of the lab combines the system-oriented design approach that we'll talk perhaps a little later, but the emphasis is on thinking system thinking, holistic approach to issues that allows the understanding. This doesn't react for some reason. Hold on. What do I do when this freezes?
Is it the Mac, right?
I'm sorry?
Are you in the Mac?
I'm on the Mac.
Okay, any Mac user who could give an advice?
I can't hear.
Any Mac user who could?
I have a Mac, but I can't imagine what happened. It just froze.
It just froze. When I click on the arrow on the bottom, that would give me the next image.
Escape.
It just doesn't move.
Try pressing escape.
Do what?
Try pressing escape.
Pressing, I can't hear you.
Escape. The escape key is at the top left corner of the keyboard.
ESC?
Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah. And then try again to project it.
Okay.
To play the presentation.
Yeah.
Go to on the left, you can see the slides you were, look for the slide you were at, and then click on play.
Mm. Now it's even worse. Hold on.
Maybe if you scroll on the left panel, you can find again this very image and select it again and play it again. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have that system-oriented design approach combined with the theory of change and a perspective on evolution, and of course the definition of sustainability that you saw a minute ago, and the set of 5 principles that I think some of you may have seen before. Anyway, we apply this combined conceptual framework, if you like, to everything that we do. So it's behind the project development efforts that we have. It's underlying the education and research programs, including the Global Sustainability Fellows that Vanessa mentioned a few minutes ago. And of course, it stands behind the concept of developing the lab as a network of ecozone-based, a global network of ecozone-based R&D and education center. Ecozone-based, I mean seeing R&D and education center that map onto particular ecozones. So drylands, tropics, etc. So the lab has been in existence now for about 10 years. We have a couple of such centers of activities, one in a desert environment, largely in Israel, and then in Costa Rica for the humid and dry tropics. And during the time that we have been in operation, what we tried to do was to start developing a portfolio of showcase projects that demonstrate the particular approach, if you like, that signature approach that I spoke about a minute ago, and demonstrate the application of the sustainability principles in actual projects in the world. So they move from the abstract principles to actual demonstration of things. And in all of this, we tried to demonstrate significant second-order change, really not tinkering at the margin, but bringing whole kind of major change in the system that we dealt with themselves. And this is what brings us back to the duck that we saw earlier, because the duck became a symbol for us for second order change, because the duck swimming here is swimming in a place that only 8 years ago or less looked like this. And today it looks like this. And this is our flagship project, Project Wadi Atir, that we'll speak about a little later, I hope, where we work with the Bedouin community in the Negev to create that major systemic change in a development, community-based development project. And when we first encountered the Bedouin community, all we encountered was a lot of desperation and poverty and no hope and desperation, even without understanding the big problems, if you like. But we also saw a group of people with a tremendous tradition and with Aboriginal knowledge, if you like, of the living in deserts environments like no one else could know. And this in very close proximity, all of this in very close proximity to some of the best world science and technology centers that dealt with issues of how you live appropriate technology for deserts environments, solar, water, all of those kind of things. But nobody was putting the two together. And that's where we decided, let's try to do something that everybody termed impossible, and that is develop a project that will be based on the tradition, aspiration, and knowledge of these people, but leveraged with advanced technology and science and the sustainability principles that we brought about. So we produced a number of innovations. We developed this community of people that we help them empower themselves and self-organize to do something unusual and innovate in a number of dimensions. For example, in introducing the women, this I need to take a step back. In the Bedouin community, as some of you may know, while the Bedouin community itself is very poor and may be at the bottom of the kind of rung of Israeli society, women in the Bedouin community itself are not in a great power position, if you like. Not only that, the separation demands of the tradition of male and female mean that there's never situation where men and women will work together as a team. And from the beginning of that project, we insisted not only that the project itself will bring about people from different tribes and different villages and different towns, but also that women will be part of the project. We work together with men and will actually play significant leadership role. And we were very successful in that effort. Other things there are developing economic opportunities that based on, again, Bedouin knowledge and traditions, We have a number of things dealing with medicinal plants and dealing with dairy products and so on. We'll go on Project Guadiatir later, so I'll be able to talk about more. But basically going away from the concept of job creation to the idea of creating a group of entrepreneurs who develop and run and own their own businesses and so on. We've also developed, we have basically an experimental farm, if you like, with a number of activities, but the whole thing is supported by an infrastructure of an integrated infrastructure of green technology that connect all the functions, basically driven by the idea of turning waste into resources, using only alternative sources of energy, dealing with wastewater, basically going towards zero waste by connecting all the functions such that the waste output of one becomes the nutrient, if you like, input to another. And then, of course, the restored ecosystem that I hinted about before, where we turned a piece of infertile desert into a really blooming garden, and demonstrating a very powerful and very cost-effective approach to combating desertification. So, and at the heart of all this, we developed an educational program. We had a visitor center there that acts as a technical support to outlying villages, as a destination, eco-tourism destination, and as a school that that has become a major educational hub for the south of the country, where many schools come to, from kindergartens all the way up to high schools. And we were able to, we are still owed by what we achieved there, by virtue of the fact that we integrated all those things that are usually separated into one endeavor. This is one of the major, if you like, major things that we are trying to demonstrate, in that many of the there are many projects around the world today, wonderful projects under the sustainability umbrella, so to speak. But when you look at them closely, you'll find out that they are sector or issue specific. So there are projects about energy, or projects about water, or projects about community, or project about something else. And we're saying you have to integrate all of those into one microcosm. And here, the integration brought this, the physical dimension, all this green technology, the economic, all those opportunities, and the social, the community level, and so forth. All of this in one microcosm that created that remarkable demonstration of what is possible when you take a non-conventional approach to those things. And the world has been paying attention. There are visitors now to see what we've been doing there from all over the world. There are more than 1,000 visitors every month. It's actually became a little industry in its own right. People from all over. And this is why we again bring you the duck that stands for the impossible, if you like. When I started this project, almost everyone that I tried to get help from or support told me this is totally crazy, it will never work. There are a million reasons why it will not work. The government will not allow it. The Bedouins you cannot work with. The desert is too harsh. And this is why the duck has become a symbol for us, if you like, of the impossible. This is as impossible as a duck swimming in that environment that you see behind it. So basically, as I said, the lab has been in operation. You can see your friend Vanessa down there in Costa Rica in one of our exercises. So the lab has been in place for a while, and I think with relatively modest resources, we were able to accomplish some important things in a number of dimensions. And the way we look at it, almost it's like the last 10 years have been a proof of concept. And now we need to take it to the next level, the next stage. And what I mean by that is 5 years from now, if you look where we want to be 5 years from now, I think we need to strengthen the infrastructure of the lab itself. Infrastructure, I mean the people who are involved with it directly, the core staff, the board, etc. we would like to have at least 5 eco-zone related centers in operations. As I said, we already have 2 in the desert and the tropics, but we want to strengthen those. And 5 years from now, I can envision a desert island ecology, perhaps in the Galapagos, and alpine, perhaps in Bhutan, the tropical in Costa Rica, where we are, the desert in Israel and other places, and perhaps a center for urban ecosystem, because I think in urban ecology, most of the, not most, all of the critical issues of sustainability converge in a most powerful way, and not only in relation to agrarian marginal communities, which are important in themselves, but obviously the heart of the current industrial economy. So if we have five centers like this with 1 or 2 projects in each, project at the order of magnitude of Project Wadi Atir. Project Wadi Atir by now is about a $12 million operation, so it's a significant kind of endeavor. And in addition, we'd like to have the educational system of the lab on a stable, continuous basis. The GSF program that Vanessa mentioned, we'd like to really see as a yearly operation, perhaps in a number of places simultaneously. And we'd like to be able to have a kind of project development fund, if you like, that allows the use of funds at the very front of projects where you still don't know what to say about them. You just feel here is something I'd like to try here. You don't really know yet what you want to do, but you need some funds in order to begin the early exploration. And there are a number of projects on our plates now that are at this stage. So we look at it and we think that it would be great if we could put together about 25 million to invest in the lab for the next 5 years. This is a very ambitious kind of goal, but we think that if we are successful at this, at the end of the time, that we'll be able to support the project portfolio much larger by using that kind of leverage strategy that we used in Wadi Atir, with very relatively modest resources at the beginning, created the conditions that attracted larger support and larger funding. So basically, when you look at all that story, and when you look at all the trends and figures, yeah, you are close to desperation, and things don't look very promising. But if you think about the duck and the potential that is imminent in the cosmic processes of order creation and in humanity and the human mind and the human heart, maybe things are not so bad. And that's what the Sustainability Laboratory is building its future on, or betting its future on. All right, this is this one. So now I can turn this off and return to the other computer, and we'll be okay. Give me a minute. All right, so we are back here, and how do you want to proceed now? This was we can go into more presentations, both about the sustainability principles and about Wadi Atir and about the design thing. But maybe it's another opportunity to stop for a few minutes and see what kind of questions emerge from that, and whether this is at all relevant. All of this. What do you think?
Do you guys have any question of what Michael just presented us? It's a very, yeah, Lourdes?
Okay, so my question would be, how did you go, it's a very ambitious project that you just presented there on the desert. And so how did you decide how to go about it? So what a kind of analysis of the system and the endeavor or the big purpose of your project, and how did you come to define that and do what you do?
There's something that is interrupting your speech.
¿Y si no me oigo? Did you hear me?
Sí, sí te oyes.
See? Did you hear me, Michael?
Can you repeat?
Okay. No, what was it, or how did you go about defining it? It was a very complex project, systemic, from the systemic point of view of all the things that were interacting there, and it seems that you found like the leverage points that turned a very adverse situation around. So how did you go about finding those? And
okay, it's a very interesting question. I think that we haven't talked about it much, but there is a fundamental difference in my mind between taking what we call a design approach and a problem-solving approach.
mm-hmm.
Again, there's a lot of noise on the line. I don't know if it helps us.
I think you can try now.
He's in mute.
Oh, you're in mute. Okay, Michael.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So the difference between, again, what I would call a design approach than problem-solving approach, when you focus on the problem, that usually requires trying to analyze it and understand it, you can be trapped by the problem itself. Instead, taking a design approach means projecting a preferred state, something that you'd like to achieve, almost ignoring the difficulty, saying, what would I like to do? I really would like to fly. Nobody knows how to fly. No one flew before, but I'd like to fly. And then try to cast back from that preferred state that I want to achieve into the steps that need to take you there. So in the case of Wadi Atir, of the project that I was talking about, that maybe we'll do a larger presentation about it, will give you a better sense of it. The beginning was not analyzing leverage points and all of those kind of things, but saying what I want to achieve here is a thriving system that has certain characteristics. And if I develop it as a system, not as a map, but as a system, if I understand what are the key components and I just connect those components, they will do the thing for me. You see what I mean by that? Living the intellectual process of mapping a system and finding the leverage points, but depending more on an intuitive understanding of complex system and how they work that comes with experience, and saying, if I am able to put together a number of key components and connect them in a way that they are not being connected now, they will perform in a different way. And those components are the community. So you need to find a community that will work with you. So that was one thing that had to be put together. The other thing was the economy. How are you going to finance it? So now you need to find a group of people that will support this. How do you deal with, what is it that you're trying to demonstrate there? A new type of economic activity. What will it be? What will it take to develop it? And so on. So it's what I'm trying to say by this, that if you have enough experience with system mapping and system thinking, and you develop the way to look at any piece of reality that way, you can find many shortcuts that don't trivialize the system, but if you're really driven by a system concept, you can put things together in a different way, and then they interact and produce the condition that you're trying to achieve. I don't know if this is helpful or if this is sounds too far-fetched.
Sorry. Yes, and regarding the notion of sustainability, do you include in it something that once you've launched this project, it can continue going on its own, or is that a factor on your future vision?
Okay. Again, that's a very important question because it points to the very definition of sustainability. If you look at the way the term is used today, in many cases, it is used in relation to some notion of continuity. So in that, this is how you relates to your question. So for example, people talk about sustainable projects in the developing community, in the development community, international development community. And you say, oh my God, they're doing project about sustainability. That's not the case. Sustainable projects refer to projects that have a life after the subsidy or the loan is done. They talk about sustainable financing again. The question there is not financing sustainability, but whether the loan will be returned. I am trying to encourage people not to use the term sustainability in such a way, but to focus only on what it means. And what it means, remember, is a particular kind of equilibrium in that interaction of a population and a carrying capacity. What it means, if you look at it that way, is that it's not a goal, it's not an adjective, as is usually used, certainly in relation to the how do you call it, the Sustainable Development Goal, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and so on. It's a system state. And a system state is born by its internal structure. You see the difference. You move from a wishful thinking to an actual architecture. And what it means is that the unsustainable conditions that we find ourselves in relation to many dimensions of the current industrial economy are driven by a particular structure. That structure is manifest in the structure of governance, the structure of the economy, the structure of society, the way we are doing things, all of those abstract, sometimes real mechanisms. All of these are the internal structures that bring about the condition that we see in the world. This is a very important realization, and it's a powerful and very deep cybernetic insight that found expression in a very obscure papers that Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics, and some of his colleagues wrote in, I think, 43 or 47, that they called purpose something in teleology. And what they showed in that paper is that the output, the observable output of any system, you think about a black box and some output, the observable output, which is really the behavior, if you like, depends on the internal structure. And this sounds like an obvious thing and very simple, but think about how many times when we are trying to change something, when you are trying to reform, we are focusing on the behavior, not on the structure. And the conclusion, if you like, from the viewpoint of everything that we are talking about, is that it's the very underlying structure of the way we're doing things today that needs to be changed. And that change has to be a fundamental second-order change, if you like, not just tinkering at the margin or dealing with how to do some roof gardens here or something else somewhere else, and so on. I hope that was an answer to that.
Any other question or comment from the group?
I have one.
Yeah.
Can you relate this concept of a structure with the structure that comes, the idea that comes from Buckminster Fuller? I'm thinking about integrity and something like that.
Well, it's obviously a very different notion, but you can interpret in a simplistic way the notion that the very geometry of the structure, that the structures that he invented produce the very high performance capabilities of those structures. Do you see what I mean? The triangulation of a dome, this is a real structure, geometry, particular structure, has a particular geometry. It's that geometry, that structure, that brings about the fundamental qualities of that invention, which has to do with economy, with lightweight, with with strength, structural strength, ability to withstand all kinds of stresses and so on. But that's I would not use that normally as a good example because the structures that I'm referring to are more abstract in nature. They are organizational entities, they are ways of doing things, they are structures of belief, they are structures of ways of thinking, there are structures of agreements, of legal systems, if you like. They are structure of the economy, what the economy regards as important, and so on.
Okay, so yeah, if I am right, I can catch that the relation between Buckminster Fuller and systemic thinking is more a metaphoric issue.
Completely. I was just going to say, the way to look at it is to think about the geometry of those structures as a good metaphor for structure in general.
Okay, and do you have some kind of relation between, in a practical sense, that goes beyond the metaphorical item that we are talking about?
Yeah, of course. It's not a metaphor. If you look at the economy, right, look at the capital markets. The capital markets are driven by a particular structure. The structure is the accounting system that we are using to evaluate what we do now. So this is a structure. You see that this is a structure of a sort, right? Oh no.
Yeah, that's right.
So the geometry is a metaphor for the fact that the structure at the end produces the behavior. And the structure of the economic system that we have today in the world, basically the structure of capitalism, if you like, as it's practiced today, has results. And the results are seen in all those issues that we are worried about.
Okay.
But if you look at those things as problems, you are missing the point, because they are not problems. They are manifestations of a structure that is producing those results.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, I have a question. It's here, Hector. How do you work out the spiritual domain when you build a structure? Is it a cultural element, or how do you define it? Because I have this problem differentiating the social among the spiritual.
Okay.
I know it's there, but I don't know how to work with it.
Okay. I would let's see how to deal with that. Okay. I think that the spiritual dimension deals with the issue of the value. What is the values that drive you? What is the values behind the economy that you are practicing? What is the values behind the social structure that you are developing? What is the values that drive you? You see the difference there, because each one of the other domains, the economic, the social, the life, whatever, are basically relate to questions of how you do things. They're basically techniques. Whereas the spiritual dimension deal with the question, why are you doing whatever you do in the first place? What is the motivation? So I'm not using the term spiritual in the conventional religious sense of a religious dogma, but as a deeper notion of the fundamental, how shall I say, fundamental characteristics of humans who are actual spiritual creatures, if you like, to always go for the beyond, to integrate something larger than what is being integrated now, and so on. And the difference in the value system makes all the difference between a predatory approach to the world, where everything exists there in order to be sold and bought or whatever as a commodity, or a stewardship, a more holistic view of things, and so on. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see it in an example more defined, but
okay. In the case
like
of
the will or the goal of
the case of
something like that, no?
In the case of Project Wadiatir, for example, the spiritual dimension found its characterization in a value proposition, basically like a declaration of principles, not the same principles, right? A declaration of principle that community said, this is what we believe, this is how we'll function, this is how we'll conduct ourselves, and so on. And everyone who was involved in the project had to sign it, so to speak. So that's a higher level than dealing with how am I going to do it, which is I'm going to use alternative sources of energy, or I'm going to produce cheese, or I'm going to have goats and other animals and so forth. It's what is it that I'm trying to commit to as a value proposition.
Michael, could you turn on the light where you are, because now we cannot see you very well, and perhaps meanwhile, if there's any other question, really.
I do have a question. I don't know if I'm going to be kind of, let's wait for Michael.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was getting...
You were disappearing.
You're so passionate about your thing that you forgot they were...
Yes, you were speaking about the domain in the darkness. You know,
okay.
I see, I'm trying to think how... Okay, there's another question you have. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if I'm going to sound confusing. I'm going to try to put this as clear as I can. But I try to always connect different points of view to other points of view, just for the sake of being critical, but also to understand how we can put this into a practical way of working with systems. What I see, like working with system mapping, is that it tends to be. I fail to see the scales in a system sometimes, and in this case, I see in your framework, I see these domains. Some of them are in different scales. Example, the economy is something that is made by the social scale of it. So economy doesn't exist by itself. It was created by humans, ergo the society. So in this case, how can we put these domains into how can we integrate the scales and the constructs in this framework when we have a system that is when we map systems and it's just a plain thing.
Okay, so, yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the most critical element in system mapping, in developing a mastery, if you like, in developing a system view of things, is the determination of the appropriate scale for what you're doing. I think that's the number one. And scale, it's a very interesting thing. We put too much on scale, on the issue of scale, because systems principles, that's the whole contention behind general system theory, that there are some fundamental systems laws, if you like, that are operable across all systems. This is way before system dynamics was developed as a technique. The realization that the fundamental realization that came out of biology, incidentally, and with Ludwig von Bertalanffy, a German biologist, was that when you look at complex systems, there seem to be certain, I'll call it laws for a lack of better word, that operate throughout, whether those systems are biological or conceptual or whatever, and whether they are small or large. So from a viewpoint of complexity, for example, a biological cell in your body is as complex as the whole universe. If you look at it at a particular
yes, I understand that, but
so the answer to your question is in choosing the appropriate level of resolution in which you have to look at any one of those components.
But aren't in that way, aren't we risking focusing in a scale or selecting one scale in this regarding your framework? I'm not trying to debunk it or anything. I'm just
that's fine.
Understand it better. It's like, for example, if I stay in certain scale, and then that will see how this material domain, which is all the energy that could be the energy of the whole universe, is affecting this little scale that I'm working on.
All right. Here,
how, for example, just with the climate change that's happening now, and this discussion if it's human created by humans or created by the movements of the cosmos. So this discussion, if we see that from a systems perspective and we stay only in the human scale, then we're forgetting the cosmic scale. And
okay. Let me try to address it, because it's a very important and relevant question. I think let's look at climate change. Okay, climate change is a phenomena that produces certain issues that people are worried about. So and it's a global issue. In other words, it's not an issue of Mexico City. Right? So that realization defines for you a systemic boundary that you want to deal with. I don't have to really deal with the Big Bang and what happened 13 billion years ago. I can focus on the planet and look at the energy regime on this planet. And when I take this view, I see that the main source of energy is burning fossil fuel. So the issue of climate change is not an issue of climate or of climate disaster where everybody's looking at, again, the behavior rather than the structure, but it's an issue of a structure of an economy that is based, a fossil fuel-based economy. So now, beyond that point, you can say, if I'm a system thinker and I'm going to design the future energy of the planet, I'm going to look at the planet as being the holistic envelope and ask the question, how do I deal with the energy needs of the planet in a different way than we're dealing it today? If you are, on the other hand, involved with Project Wadi Atir, which is a small community with different level of energy requirements, you're saying here, I'm going to make sure that in that small microcosm that I have, I'm going to demonstrate what would be true for the larger scale, the planet as a whole. So even for a small farm that requires 100 megawatts of energy, I'm going to produce energy in an alternative way using, in this case, it's a hybrid solar, wind, and storage system that will be true for this scale. So when I deal with Wadi Atir, I don't spend time worrying about Greenland icebergs floating to the sea. But I'm saying if I want to demonstrate what I would do if I were given the job to design the future energy regime of the planet, I'm just demonstrating on a completely different scale. And each such scale, and that's another fantastic and very interesting quality of system, each such scale is kind of autonomous in a sense. Why? Because systems are nesting and they have this phenomena of recursion. So from an intellectual point of view, you can worry yourself endlessly about the scale and am I doing the right thing or not. But at the end of the day, as a designer, you have to focus on the appropriate scale for what you're doing. And that's true for any issue, whether you are designing an airplane or a car or a chair or a project.
And just to build on that, when we get the chance to see the societal metabolism methodology, we could see that if we address biophysical issues of our systems, we could address the feasibility and viability of systems. Those are in different scale, but we can achieve assessments that talk about very complex issues, but allocated in certain let's say in a certain system boundary, but we need to start thinking about other types of issues to measure. For instance, if we measure biophysical issues, we will find out how can we deal with these scale issues, and that also relates to our system understanding. But I think we could keep on questions if you have other questions?
Yes, I have a question, or I'd like to at least understand better. I was reading like the domains, and specifically when I was reading the second one, the economic domain, it seems to have this perspective of the, I don't know how to say it, but maybe a more Occidental point of view of how, and very like set on a capitalist world and economic world, and you talk about taxation and policies and economic calculations and all these things that should be considered. Is this document like tended for this part of the world, for this capitalist part of the world, whereas for other communities or how do they insert into this realm? How does it come together, or were you like trying to address the bigger companies and the bigger the exploiters of the world resources by making this document?
Okay. About the Occidental view of economy, the first thing that I would say about it before going back to the economic domain itself is that whether you like it or not, it's becoming the dominant force in the world, at least in the magnitude of its impact.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, and in fact, the economic domains is a foundation for a critique of the current dominant economic system by saying that the current economic system and mostly the goals that it seeks, which is continuous growth, and the measuring logic that it uses are lacking, are fundamentally flawed. Are you with me on this?
Yes. I mean, yeah. It's just that I was trying like based on the premises that when something is not working, instead of trying fixing the one that's not working, just do something new. It seems to address a bit more something that's not working and just like trying to say what you could do.
No, it's not that it's not working. It's working very well. but it produces, the result that it produces are worrisome. Some people are very happy with the current system because they benefit from it in a great way. And as it turns out, it's a very small minority, maybe 1% of the world population and so forth. So you have a very unstable situation there, both by the fact that it creates incredible imbalances, extreme conditions, and by the fact that it allows us to count basically negative things as though they were positive. In other words, it allows us to count depletion of resources and consumption as though it was income.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
so
that's
maybe that concept is totally alien to an Aboriginal group that you can still find in the forest in Peru or something. But the main engines of the world economy that are producing all those impacts around the world, including climate change, are all characteristic of an economic system that has to be restructured if we have any chance.
Yes, that's my point. Yeah, that the document is more like addresses this type of people and of interests, like a specific interest of this very big.
And there's no question, incidentally, that there's a lot that can be learned by the economic orientation of different Aboriginal communities, where the whole relationship with nature, for example, one of the big problems, I think, of the current world economy is a complete delinking between the dynamics of the economy and the physical reality of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And this has never happened before. I mean, because people that lived close to the earth always understood intuitively what are the limitations that they cannot break if they want their system to stay viable. And I think that the huge wealth and huge advantages that were produced with the Industrial Revolution, for the moment blinded humanity to think that anything goes. It was a little bit like a child in a toy store. Only bigger, more. And I think that now we are beginning to wake up perhaps to the fact that that the dominant structure has a lot of flaws in it. Now, I know that there are very powerful individuals and a very powerful organization that would fight that kind of statement. But that's because they are benefiting from what's happening now.
Thank you.
More?
Of those who watched the video or read the framework, do you have any question also about, I would like to express to you, I don't know if you read Monica's comment, but it's impressive to really see how a desert land that was, it was said that it was impossible to revert the desertification trend there. It's restored. And it's now also having a lot of effects on the community, and it was restored because of the community there. So the implications are many, and it's like we have talked about this before, but it's the principle of order in the universe, that if you have the right elements working in a system, and
you'll get the right result. Exactly. And what you have to become is a master of structures. Now, I'm a little worried that we are running out of time very quickly. I will have to stop at 9:30, and there's quite a lot of stuff that I wanted still to share with you. and we will just not be able to do it. But I will be very happy to have another session with you, group, if you'd like.
I think that will be awesome, actually, because Michael has this presentation on design thinking, and also I think the ideas about cybernetics could be very worthy. And
even the presentation about Wadiatir could be a thing worthwhile.
I think we can organize internally as a group to see and propose you some dates. And we are totally honored of the time you have here, you have spent with us. And perhaps to make the best use of the last 12 minutes that we have with you. If you guys have any question or any concern, also Michael presented to us a way of approaching new experiments about sustainability, and this kind of vision of demonstrating that another way of doing things is possible. I think it's quite powerful, and how this experimentation approach, it's really totally out of this management and planning thinking that is like very vertical, very rigid, like how experimentation as an approach in order to understand how to proceed with our planet and with our own lives in this state of humanity. That's one thing that perhaps, I don't know if there are any thoughts about that. And the other thing that I think it's super interesting that Annalisa was raising is, so we all come from Mexico, which is part of Latin America, and let's say that there's like a background of information that is quite different to how development and sustainability is understood in the global north, let's say. So there are a lot of things that perhaps in the framework, if you read it, you will find, you will have comments on it. So I think it's amazing place of discussing that, because Michael wrote the framework. And also I see like in the things they are implementing in the lab, he's implementing in the lab, in its own behavior, there are a lot of, let's say, I think words are not enough. And I think there are improvements that we could do together to our sustainability understanding, even if it's written in the framework in a certain way. And I think these types of dialogues could be a lot of very useful for ourselves as a group, listening to Michael, and perhaps also will inform Michael of new ideas of understanding things. So feel free. So I already took 2 minutes, but please, if you have any last comments or questions.
Me comments or your colleague comments?
I think any you can. I like if they can make you more. Any comment or question, but if you have something also to ask to the group, that would be amazing too.
No, I think I will just repeat my offer. I don't want to be tiresome and impose myself on you, but if as a group you feel that this discussion, continue this discussion might be useful, I'll be very happy to have another session and we can go into more depth into the principles themselves. We can look at the Project Wadiatir, especially the ecosystem restoration component. We can talk about change more. We can talk about the design approach more, and come to the conclusion that we'll need the third session.
Love to hear about design thinking and how you've been using it over there. Especially, we use it a lot in my consultancy firm here in Mexico for different purposes, and I'd love to hear how is it being used over there.
Okay, we'll do that.
I have a question, a really quick question. Michael, I want to know, how do you achieve to move all these communities to do something? I know that maybe they are in a situation that they need to do that, but like here in Mexico City, or I don't know, maybe in another big city, how do you manage to leave that message in the people, so they can like all go to do the right things? I don't know how.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The thing is here, the first thing, let's look at the steps for Wadiatir. I go to a place where I had absolutely no understanding of, or connection to, I didn't know anyone, any Bedouin or anything, but I see a situation that is problematic. Just as a human being, you look at something and say, this is not right, what's going on here? And you say, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if I could, I don't mean it wouldn't be interesting if we can do something here that will bring some real change, different than the misery that is there and so on. And then you say, it would be great for the lab to succeed in such a thing because it will give a very good demonstration for the intent, what the lab wants to do. And it will give a very good demonstration of the application of the principles that otherwise stay as conceptual. Here is an opportunity to do something in the real world. And the more difficult it is, the more relevant the experiment will be if it's successful. So this is one. That's the intention. Now you say, okay, I found something here that I'd like to meddle with. The next thing that is clear is without this community participation, you will not be able to do anything. But you don't know that community. So you have to go there and spend some time and look for people and talk to them and see if you get any response. So the first step was actually, before I knew anything about the Bedouin, was going there and going from village to village like an astronaut, from out and talking to people, and this one send you to this one and so forth, and beginning to see whether there is within that community an interest of doing the kind of thing that you want to do. And I guess I was perhaps lucky or not lucky, but in that early exploration, trying to, for me, to understand better what's going on there, I met a few people that really resonated with what I wanted to do, and they wanted to use it. But then, so at a certain point, after a couple of weeks or something, we could say, okay, I've been able to identify some powerful leadership in that community that will join in that offer and will be a partner in doing such an experiment. But that only started a year and a half. Listen to it, it's a year and a half that we spent in talking to people and going from group to group and getting a group of kind of opinion makers, about 40 people discussing what will it do, how will the project do, who will do what, etc. And out of that year and a half came a number of things. Came a definition of what the project will focus on, came the declaration of principles, that was that manifestation of the spiritual dimension, and more importantly, came a commitment of a small group, about 5 people, that say we want to devote ourselves to this project and lead it. So we had now a project team and we could start a thing going. But it took a lot of work. And I can say even today, 10 years later, that the human element, if you like, the human component is the weakest link in all of this and the most difficult. The technology part is the easy one.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much.
All right, I will have to run away, but thank you very much for your patience and for listening to all this. I hope it was useful, and I'll be very happy, as I said, to come back to it.
Thank you so much, Michael. I received several messages of people that were very excited about listening to you. It was an honor to have you here with us, and we will find out a date and propose you back, because I think we definitely want a second session, and thanks for your generosity.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Ok, pues tuvimos un ratito a Michael. ¿Tienen algunos como comentarios finales? Y también como pues saber dónde está, si les gustaría que sí tratáramos de buscar un día en la agenda para las cosas que todavía tiene que compartir con nosotros. ¿Cómo ven? O sea, es como parte del interés del grupo.
Para mí sí, sería súper bueno.
A mí también.
Sí,
Estoy thinking el proyecto de Guatiatir, o no sé cómo se llama.
El proyecto de Variatir.
Ese.
Sí, quizás más sobre frameworks, o sea, como más sobre... Y no sé, o sea, digo, yo hablo por mí, o sea, quizás no tendríamos que mover el calendario, podemos abrir otra fecha, para mí está bien, o sea, me adapto.
Ok. Ahora checo cuándo es como nuestra siguiente sesión. Creo que algo que sería interesante, porque yo lo estaba platicando con Michael y le decía que después de cada vez que veíamos un tema había una actividad y le preguntaba si podíamos hacer nosotros algo como grupo para retroalimentar al laboratorio. El laboratorio es una organización, pero realmente es una comunidad súper chiquita. O sea, es Michael y algunos gente del board, y hay colaboración con algunas universidades que están haciendo experimentos de sustentabilidad donde se aplican los 5 principios en desarrollo de tecnologías, etcétera, pero digamos que la mayor meta del laboratorio es crear estos 5 proyectos que demuestren que lo imposible es posible, utilizando principios de cibernética y de sistemas, y utilizando ese framework de sustentabilidad que el desarrollo que tiene en el centro la dimensión espiritual. Entonces, o sea, pero todo lo está haciendo con colaboraciones, entonces el laboratorio no es un laboratorio, ¿no? Entonces, si a alguno de ustedes les interesa una colaboración más cercana, o si hay algo que a lo mejor pudiéramos aportar, sería interesante. La pregunta que hizo Ana Luisa al final, si ustedes leen el framework, porque como a mí me ha tocado mientras lo traducíamos al español el framework, que hay muchos conceptos que sí son bastante, bueno, nosotros ya vimos pluralismo epistemológico y justicia epistémica, que sí son bastante occidentales. Entonces, es interesante ver, por ejemplo, creo que en alguna parte del framework de sustentabilidad dice que la dimensión material, o no sé si es material o la económica, trata de maximizar el uso de los recursos naturales. Entonces, si nosotros nos quedamos con esa frase, maximizar el uso de los recursos naturales se siguen viendo como una forma utilitaria y no se dice tratar de tener una interacción más sana con la naturaleza. O sea, por ejemplo, que son como visiones de mundo que están ahí. Entonces, hay muchas cosas que creo que a lo mejor podrían enriquecer. En algún momento se pensó o estuvimos discutiendo si podíamos presentar el framework del laboratorio a la comunidad de economía ecológica, porque la conferencia de este año, la conferencia internacional, va a ser en México, si podíamos presentarlo y que fuera criticado el framework, ¿no? Para poder empezar a elevar esas definiciones de sustentabilidad. ¿Cómo se entiende sustentabilidad desde diferentes pensamiento y cosmovisiones, ¿no? Entonces, digamos que ese proyecto, la verdad es que porque lo mismo somos, o sea, la gente que colabora con el app es como somos pocos, entonces yo la verdad es que no le pude dar seguimiento a eso, pero Michael sí estaba interesado. Pero si en este momento, por ejemplo, si tenemos una siguiente sesión y podemos generar un diálogo que también enriquezca desde a lo mejor nociones de acá, los entendimientos, o hagamos un buen debate de sustentabilidad, eso sería interesante. Entonces, como que hay varias cosas que podríamos explorar, no sé qué hayan captado ustedes, qué les gustaría como explorar un poquito más, porque con base en eso podemos proponerle una agenda, y también que esto sea pues lo estamos como hospedando en nuestro espacio del diplomado, pero también qué podemos retribuir, ¿no? No sé qué pensamientos tengan de lo escuchado, de estas ideas.
Yo tengo una pregunta, Vane. Eso suena súper interesante y puede ser muy enriquecedor incluso para él y el grupo, ¿no? Del lab. Cuando te referías que querías profundizar más en la parte del diseño, eso sería ya más como entender cómo implementa los conceptos diseñando los proyectos, ya más a nivel implementación, o a qué se referiría eso.
Creo que no llegaríamos a lo mejor a ese nivel de profundidad, pero tiene como toda una forma en la que presenta esta forma de entender los sistemas y cómo se aplica un diseño funcional a estructuras y combina algunos ejemplos con cuestiones teóricas. Es como con una plática, pero creo que ese diálogo podría dar como mucho, podría ofrecer mucho. Y después podríamos ver casos aplicados de cómo se construyó, cómo se empezó a pensar el laboratorio en Costa Rica, cómo se diseñó todo ese proceso. Entonces, primero con esa contextualización general y a lo mejor irnos a cuestiones específicas del diseño de Badiatir y de Martina Bustos. Y sobre esto también, y creo que sería interesante porque, digamos que Michael mismo dice, ¿no? El proyecto de Badiatir ha tenido resultados impresionantes, o sea, ahorita es como caso ejemplar de Naciones Unidas cuando al principio le dijeron que eso era imposible y eso no se podía lograr, pero él mismo dice que no está terminado y que de ninguna manera puede ser, o sea, que es un experimento al final, que ese caso no muestra así todo el potencial que es la aplicación de los principios, que estamos justamente aprendiendo cómo se aplican. Entonces, eso también sería interesante porque muchos de ustedes ya están haciendo proyectos, por ejemplo, Chuy, con todo lo que, el bagaje que tiene, ¿no?, de regeneración, sería interesante como ver qué observamos, ¿no?, en los proyectos y podemos como hacer críticas constructivas o podemos como dar ejemplos de otras tecnologías, o sea, como que sea un diálogo más enriquecedor y creo que va en el espíritu de lo que es el laboratorio y que podríamos también retribuir a la participación de Michael, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo ven? ¿Qué ideas les surgen para una segunda sesión?
Pues a mí sí me gustaría partir, porque creo que los principios pueden ser aplicables hasta cierto punto en muchas cosas, pero a mí sí me gustaría conocer más del proceso de design thinking. Y creo que más bien nuestra posible aportación o crítica o análisis, lo que tú quieres llamar, sería más hacia el proceso de design thinking, porque eso es lo que se aplica. Y a nosotros nos serviría mucho poder tener otras posibilidades, otras visiones y compararlo con, por ejemplo, el proceso que nosotros usamos, que yo uso en sistémico, o el proceso que tiene la UMA, o el proceso que usa Vibrancy. Todos son procesos que pueden como enriquecerse unos a otros. Entonces creo que estaría padre partir de ahí.
Ok.
A mí también me gustaría este giro.
Ok, entonces lo proponemos como design thinking y luego aplicaciones que se han hecho y discusión sobre esas aplicaciones. Y pues sería interesante traer propuestas o traer también como
casos
de cómo lo hace la UMA, cómo lo hace Sistémico, u otros proyectos que ustedes conozcan. Por ejemplo, ahora que estábamos allá en Israel, a mí me tocó dar clases sobre el pensamiento del sur global y cómo entendemos sustentabilidad y presentar algunos proyectos como la sepan. Y ahí como hay casos que realmente pues no se llaman laboratorios de sustentabilidad, pero que están dando resultados también como muy buenos, ¿no? Entonces presentar algunos de esos casos o ponerlos a dialogar con lo que ahorita es Badiatir o Martina Bustos podría ser también interesante si ustedes conocen, ¿no? Si ustedes han participado en alguna comunidad y ven, por ejemplo, cómo el framework de sustentabilidad del lab parece que está aplicado en otro lugar y qué es lo que observan, ¿no? O sea, y claro que no está aplicado, pero si ustedes pueden leer qué es sustentabilidad a partir del framework, pero en proyectos que ustedes conocen, ¿no? Eso creo que ayudaría muchísimo al lab también identificar qué proyectos están siguiendo como nociones de sustentabilidad similares, ¿no? Creo que eso también ayudaría mucho. Y que va en la línea de poder hablar de las aplicaciones. O la discusión sobre aplicaciones. ¿Cómo ven? ¿Algún otro como inquietud, comentario?
Oye, Vane, nosotros no sé, pero es posible ver cómo hizo el mapa de las intervenciones donde ha trabajado. En el documento de Costa Rica y viene, no lo recuerdo, no lo alcancé a leer todo.
Sí, yo le subí,
Está en la plataforma, pero no lo leí todo.
Lo pueden ahí ver, y podemos hablar sobre eso. El documento de de cómo se construyó el laboratorio o el diseño del laboratorio en Costa Rica fue a de ir con la comunidad, entender que hacer la visión de lo que la comunidad es bonito, que va con las nociones nahuas del encuentro verdadero de personas como de diferentes mundos, que vienen a lo mejor de la ciudad y gente de comunidades, se encuentran en propósitos comunes. Entonces, cuando trabajamos el proyecto en Costa Rica, nosotros fuimos y dijimos, somos colegas del Laboratorio de Sustentabilidad y así vemos el mundo. Y conocimos a la comunidad y la comunidad también explicó qué les interesaba a ellos, cuáles eran sus problemas y empezamos a construir un propósito juntos, nosotros y ellos. Y ellos hicieron su visión de la comunidad y a partir de eso empezamos a mapear. Y a partir de eso, como identificamos un plan y se está hablando con un montón de stakeholders para poder hacer ese laboratorio, etcétera, ¿no? Como con colaboraciones, con universidades, la gente está liderando ese proceso. Entonces, que el proyecto, el segundo laboratorio apenas está como arrancando, ¿no? El de Badiatir es impresionante porque los beduinos palestinos son la comunidad probablemente más oprimida de Israel. Además que viven en el desierto, las condiciones son extremas. Y entonces que Michael haya decidido ir con ellos. Yo me enteré, por ejemplo, ahora que fui, que Michael tiene como todo este lenguaje porque trabajó, fue consultor como de organizaciones internacionales, pues un lenguaje bastante, a lo mejor como decía Ana Luisa, occidental, pero él estuvo viviendo en casas de campaña en el desierto con los beduinos, ¿no? Él siendo judío, pero empezó a trabajar con ellos y por 8 años, ¿no? Entonces, las reivindicaciones sociales, además de la restauración ecológica, son súper importantes, ¿no? Entonces, ahí está, o sea, y esa es como la idea del laboratorio, o sea, lograr lo imposible, ¿no? Demostrar que sí se pueden cosas aplicando esos principios. Entonces, bueno, sí podemos hablar, el documento de Costa Rica está ahí, ninguno de los dos casos se consideran como casos acabados o la implementación perfecta del framework, no son eso, son experimentos sobre los que hay que aprender. Entonces, bueno, pues ahí está ese documento, lo subí a la plataforma, ese documento se construyó con algo de asesoría de Bernard Amadei, que es el director de Ingenieros Sin Fronteras, otros colegas, un fellow se fue por un año a estudiar como las propiedades de la tierra, la composición demográfica de la comunidad en Costa Rica, que es una comunidad apátrida de migrantes nicaragüenses asentados al lado de un basurero y de ahí comen. Entonces de ahí comen y de ahí viven y con ellos estuvimos trabajando, ¿no? Entonces, o sea, como por eso casi todos los casos del laboratorio quieren ser emblemáticos y que demuestren, ¿no? Que sí es posible. Entonces un poco ahí va el approach, está ese caso, lo pueden checar. Y pues a lo mejor el compromiso que podríamos hacer es pues venir preparados, ¿no? O sea, como volver a leer el framework, decirle, ¿no? Que queremos hablar de design thinking y como el método, cómo es que se trabaja desde el Laboratorio de Sustentabilidad en esos ejemplos y si ustedes pueden traer casos o metodologías o ejemplos que puedan ponerse en diálogo, yo creo que un diálogo sería súper fructífero, ¿no? Y aprovechar también su disposición. La verdad es que yo lo vi bastante contento de estar en este espacio y también les agradezco a ustedes como la atención. Y bueno, yo estoy muy contenta en general. A mí me encanta lo que haces.
Súper abierto, la verdad, muy lindo abierto para compartir, para respondernos, sí, muy entusiasmado. Estuvo muy lindo, la verdad. Gracias, Fanny.
Sí, es súper inspirador, la verdad, desde que vi el video quedé así, wow, impresionada con él. Qué padre, muchas gracias.
Qué bueno. Pues yo tengo que correr ahora, podemos, les mando fechas posibles y le pregunto a él y por correo nos ponemos de acuerdo. Y digamos que más o menos lo que hablamos puede ser la estructura de la siguiente sesión. ¿Están de acuerdo? ¿Sí?
Sí. Oye, lo que no me queda claro es porque había como unas posibles tareas para hacer a partir de esta sesión, pero creo que esas entonces se van a replantear o sí siguen o cómo lo hacemos.
No, esta tarea como sobre esta sesión se replantea. Yo creo que Déjenme pensarlo y a lo mejor puedo dar como instrucciones para venir preparados al segundo diálogo y
Mejor, ok.
ir hablando con él y a ver si hay algo más bien que podamos aportar al laboratorio.
Oye, Vane, pero Michael sí está interesado en entrarle a temas más técnicos porque no tocó nada técnico ahorita. ¿Cuál es su postura cuando da pláticas?
Yo creo que si le pedimos sí lo va a cubrir y probablemente no vamos a ir a algo demasiado técnico porque es como el tiempo corto, pero a lo mejor puede mostrar el approach y los ejemplos, ¿no? De aplicaciones en lo general.
Ya, pues sí, lo que hablábamos de design thinking, ¿no? ¿Cómo lo usa? Ok.
Bueno, pues gracias por hoy y estamos atentos a la siguiente reunión. ¿Va?
Vale.
Bueno, un abrazo a todas y
Adiós.
todos.
Muchas gracias.
Igualmente.
Gracias.
Adiós.
Buenas noches.
Subo el video por YouTube.
Va.
Gracias.
Órale. Adiós.